Welcome to the Booktopia podcast. My name is Nick Wasiliev, Booktopia's social media specialist and resident sports nerd. I'm coming to you today from the lands of the Camaragal Nation, and I pay my respects to all elders, past, present, and emerging. But today, I'm extremely excited to have you here with us because outside of my normal work, working at Booktopia, I do have a real love and passion for everything sport related. And my guest today is Brendan Jack. He is a journalist and a former player for the Sydney Swans, and he's about to drop a brand new memoir, 28, a memoir of football, addiction, art, masculinity, and love. And he joins us right now over the airwaves. Brandon, welcome to the pod, mate.
Hi, Nick. Thanks for having me on today.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you, mate. And first of all, how are you? I know that at the time of recording, both of us are currently in the midst of facing several more weeks of lockdown here in Sydney. Are you doing okay? How are you?
I am. I'm coping well, reaching out to a lot of people and having conversations. And, I've thankfully found motivation to write some new things. You can put a lot of pressure on yourself to create things in lockdown, and sometimes it doesn't happen. But, I'm grateful that I've got a spark at the moment, which is nice. So yeah, that's helping me get through day by day as well.
That's great. It's really positive to hear that, you're taking the time to do projects like this, like 28, as well as other stuff in between. Tell us a little bit about this memoir that you've put together.
Yeah. Look, I should have that nailed by now, shouldn't I? It's in short, it's a book about my kind of lifelong relationship with football. But by no means is it a football book. It's a book that explores a lot of things that in my life have been associated with football. So ideas of, who am I as a person, as a man? I touch on what love is to me as well, and the idea of creativity and artistic pursuits, which I'm now following, and how it all kind of relates. Funnily enough, it started as the desire to not write a book about football. And that's the first meeting with my publisher went, I said, I'm not writing about football. They said, yep, great, write whatever you want. Wrote like 10 dot points about football in a first manuscript, like summarized my career in 10 dot points. And then a few things happened. And over the course of 18 months, I realized that there was something to be written about football for me. And now was the right time. It was a bit of a process, but the final version of the book came really quickly, and I'm glad that I captured that on the page, how I was feeling at the time.
Yeah, it is a fantastic memoir, by the way. I absolutely enjoyed it. And additionally, like you say, there is, obviously football happens within the story, but it's not just about football, which I think is so many people, whenever they're chasing sporting memoirs, often just are all after that nitty gritty stuff. But there's something a lot more to this, book. And, it's a fantastic examination of course. You do, of course, touch on that sport, but also, like you say, the male experience. There is one thing that I really wanted to kind of ask you off the bat here. Obviously, because a lot of our listeners obviously haven't had the chance to read the book yet. Mm-hmm. We're in a very similar age bracket, and for me, when it comes to writing a memoir at the age that we're at now, often we're still finding our way in the world. And you mentioned at the start of the book, again, that this is not your life story. Why was now the right time to tell this story?
Yeah, I've done a lot of creative writing classes, and I minored in writing at my university, and I kind of have become aware of the importance of the lens which you write through and the time in which you write. And I touch on it at some stage in the book, and I say the things I'm feeling now, I might not feel in a year or 2 years or 10 years, but I feel them right now. And for me, I was in such a unique but also common to a player's position where I was when I kind of started, I guess 3 years post professional football. So I'd been out of the game for 3 years. And, a lot of sports memoirs and biographies, when do they come out? As soon as that player retires, and normally it's a very successful player, and it's a Christmas stocking thing that, everyone gets shoved down, but you don't know how that player then feels 3 years later or whatever. And it's different for everyone. But, I had a lot of discontent and uncertainty and a lot of feelings that weren't resolved. And I think writing it now at the age of, so I was 26, I guess, when I wrote that book, or wrote this book, it would be a far different book in 10 years' time. And I think we miss out on that searching process and those feelings that I'm experiencing now if I were to write it then.
Yeah, it's fantastic that you're just cataloging these feelings and these particular moments at this time, but also the relationship that you have with sport. Because early on, you talk about in the book that you were a football household. You had a rugby league dad. You'd do the stuff like you'd race the bus home on the street.
It's the thing, like you don't realize that that's not what everyone experiences. And for me, I knew I had a dad who was a really famous rugby league player, but I also thought like everyone's dad was a really famous rugby league player. I was like, your dad didn't play for Australia? Like, okay, sure. But that's just, that was our thing. That was our family's thing. And that's what I did because I wanted to be, like my dad, and I wanted to be like my brothers. And that's the essence of why I think I started playing football. And it took me a long time to it sounds obvious saying that, but it did take me a long time to kind of realize that was my main motivation for playing.
You mean your parents and that family dynamic?
Yeah. For wanting to, at the end of the day, I started playing football because it was great for me to be a part of a family, and that's what we spent time doing.
You talk about, because you did play rugby league when you were a lot younger, but then you moved to the AFL after winning a golf chipping contest against your dad, which I find absolutely hilarious. And you talk about, and this is kind of interesting in terms of your own relationship with sport, but then more, it's the starting point of helping you discover yourself, because you talk about that you actually found enjoyment in AFL. And I love that you talk about how you did footy speak chat. I know that kind of chat, it's littered with that element of kind of self-deprecation whenever you're within that setting. What, just to give a sense for people, what is one thing that most people really get wrong in terms of misconceptions around working in a professional sporting environment that you have at the Swans?
I had a thought just then. Like, I obviously played rugby league and Australian rules football, and I still call it AFL, even though you're not meant to call it AFL. Just because I'm a Sydney boy who grew up and went to a rugby school, and I had a few back and forth with editors over, is it Guernsey or Jersey? And I'm like, I call it Jersey, but they're like, the Melbourne audience won't get it. You have to say Guernsey. I'm like, well, I call it Jersey. And throughout the book, when I say football to me is both Aussie rules and rugby league, because football is just, it's a game to me. It doesn't matter what version that game is. And that's why it's my relationship with football in all its forms. The thing about, I guess, the footy speak and being in a football environment is, it's so similar to any other job in a lot of ways. Like, there are people on the fringe of it all the time. I think it's more clearly defined in football because every week there's a team that's picked and you're either in that team or you're not. So it's a really clear yes or no. And that can be really disheartening, which it was for me. But there's always, you want to climb ladders and you want to be the best, and there's things in your way stopping you from being the best. And not everyone can be the best. Not everyone can be the boss in every workplace. So, the things that I've got mates who are tradesmen and mates who work in all different kinds of jobs, but footy, the environment is similar in a lot of ways.
It's interesting kind of looking at it now within context, because you also examine your own personal progression from the mental health perspective side of things. I get a sense, particularly when you start talking about your second year blues, premiership hangovers, and you were spending a lot of time drinking, and even how you were talking about when you had a severe ankle injury and you just forced yourself to play because you were just driven by that desire to be selected and climb those ladders. I get a real sense that this environment is just a real tough, gritty place that would just drive someone, particularly someone who came into the game so young. It would potentially have very bad ramifications if you're not really grounded.
I think, and the way I've probably communicated that in the book, which I'm so glad I did this when I played, I include my diary entries. Because I couldn't recapture that stuff now if I tried, and I'd forgotten about it because I shoved those diaries away, and finding those was part of the process in wanting to write this again. I think when people read like day after day, those were not like my football diaries. Those were my personal diaries. Those were like everything in my life was that diary, and it was just football. And I hope that gets across the idea to people that, we talk about the mental health of athletes and footy players, and people kind of brush over it sometimes and say like, oh, but they're getting paid this much, and, it's a luxury job. Like, it's bloody hard to switch off. Like, I was manic with it, and I know the other guys were the same, and maybe they didn't write it down like I did. But being in that environment where your whole life is being in that team and winning and being the best player, and self-talk around, I am the best midfielder in the competition. Like, everyone has to believe that. It takes its toll on everyone, but, especially the guys like me who don't get the reality, the motivation and the reality don't align. It's a really difficult position to be in.
I get the sense from looking back and reading the book that you've now had the power of time away from that space, and that it's quite a frustrating space to be in terms of that. Would you say anything could be done to change that mentality for people who were in that position, or is that just something that is just so difficult to examine because you're in such a high pressure situation the entire time?
It's so difficult because, we should motivate ourselves to be the best, and we should be driven with everything we do. I think personally, I just really struggled to find a line between my football career and who I am as a person. Clubs associations and everything can look at improving the mental health support around players. And the thing is, I still had access to a psychologist, but I would always shut down the conversation. And maybe this will help, I guess, people be aware that footy players will just, put their guards up and will lie, even if they're hurting and they're down, because we don't want to look weak. So maybe this will be a voice that'll show that to people, and speak for people who wouldn't normally speak about it. It's finding a balance between that relentless drive and not, scorning yourself when you don't succeed. I don't think you have to be one or the other.
Agree. Yeah. It's actually also interesting that you mentioned that. You talk about that context. There is a part of the book where you do talk about playing with Goodsey. And not just, but what I love about it is that, yes, he's a fantastic player. He's won Brownlow medals and he's got flags and stuff, but you were what really impressed you was how he would approach you as a person off the field.
That was one of the more kind of enjoyable parts of the book to write, because I've written articles about Adam before and the issues surrounding him, but when I kind of sat down, a lot of this book is I just try and paint pictures of people or of things, and I think everyone's smart enough to make up their own opinion based off that. And I have so many little tiny memories of Goodsey that show who he is as a person. The image of him at the front we all had seats in team meetings, and footy clubs are weird like that. Like, you have your seat and that's your seat. And if you steal somebody else's seat, that doesn't happen. Goodsey was like right at the front in front of horse with a metal drink bottle under his leg and like a hat on his head all the time. And he sat up straight, and you're like, there's Goodsey. There's a story about, I think me and him were walking from the club to our cars, and there'd been this riddle that was going around the club, and I won't tell the riddle because, it's a long one, but he kind of stopped me on the way and helped me get the answer to the riddle that he could see I wasn't getting. And just little moments like that, you see who he is as a person, more than anything. And, there's so much to say about Goodsey, but I'm glad that I was able to share those memories of him. Yeah,
and what I thought was impressive in kind of leaning back into what you actually wanted to cover about this book was that I think he got the sense that I got from him was that he could tell that coming into an environment like that is quite difficult, particularly if you're someone who is a younger player and you're in that high pressure world to perform, and that the strain on it can actually be quite telling. You talk a lot about kind of the mental health issues they experienced, and that your response had been around the mental health issues was to erect barriers, go silent, not say anything.
Yeah, I like, it's so typical of a lot of people I know, especially young men or just men in general. My coping mechanisms were, don't talk about it and drink. And I was like, I never never ever thought I really had a problem with alcohol. But when I think back, like I was a binge drinker in like a really, really bad way, because I wouldn't need to drink during the week, because we had a rule that you had to, wait, it had to be 7 days between games so you could drink. So I wouldn't drink on a Wednesday or a Thursday, but I'd wait for Saturday to get around, and I would build it all up and spend it on that one night. And I'd, have this toxic competitiveness around drinking as well. Like I had to drink more than my teammates. So if he's had one drink, well, I'm going to have one as well. And it got to a point where, when my career was at its lowest, I would just drink myself until I couldn't walk anymore. And that was my solution. And I'd wake up the next day and go to the club and do recovery, and everything would just keep going.
Yeah, which is a difficult place to get yourself out of. But I mean, you did eventually. And I think you do a lot of association or kind of separation of yourself from the sporting mentality that you had at that time. Even your nickname BJ, which you kind of describe as a an ego. Yeah. And when you were in that mindset, you just let BJ take over because it was just easier for you to let him run things and look after things.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. Like if somebody calls me Brandon, it's just so foreign, because that's who I was for all those years at a footy club, and before that as well, in different footy circles as well. I've always just been BJ. But part of the book was I didn't want to just accept that was a separate part of me and cut it off and be like, nah, that's BJ, that's his problem. I wanted to really dive down and go, well, no, at the end of the day, I am BJ and he's a part of me, and let's not just do the easy thing and say, nah, he's not me. Let's actually dig down into it and say, well, why is it me, and what is it about me?
So trace that back to me, because I get a sense, because going back to this, again, this book, while it does talk about football, it's not the key core part of the story. Often when you have memoirs like this, people talk about how they came to this fantastic endpoint, and this is where they are, this is the place that they're at, this is the journey that they've gone through. So I got a sense for a lot of this book. There was a lot of, because it isn't just about football. There's a lot of examination of you and who you are as a person. Looking back at that, where does football fit within your life now?
It's as I was writing, I think I had, and this is what I liked about it, and this is why when I talk about lens before, I think, when guys normally get to the end of their career, they have a clear endpoint right to. I started without that endpoint, and I started writing at a time when I wasn't playing football for the first time in my life, where even I wasn't playing any local league footy. It made me really have to think about, do I love football or do I hate football? Because for a while there, I'd convinced myself that I hated football. And a lot of that's, I think, because it hurt me, or I thought it had hurt me. As I kind of wrote this book and did a lot of other things in my life as well to improve myself, how I was with my mental well-being, could finally start, seeing that football did have a place in my life, and I can't deny that. And then, literally 2 days before I had to submit the final version of the manuscript, I'd played my first game of like local footy again, and had so much fun. It was something that I'd never thought I'd do again. Was able to play just without looking forward, like to being like, I have to be more. I can just play footy on the weekend and enjoy it. And I'm so grateful that I got to that point, because, it's such a great game and such a valuable thing to be able to kick a ball around with people that you know and care about. I had no idea that I'd end up there. I probably thought I would never get there. But I'm so glad that I did.
That's great. It's such a positive thing to, especially considering the space that you had been in, to view this, to be able to come out the other side and view it in a positive way and experience it in a way that is much more truthful to who you are. And touching on that point, I know that you talk a lot about the stuff that you're doing now a lot. So your music, your writing, your artistic endeavors, and I particularly love when you talk about the likes of musicians that our generation have loved for years, like Kurt Cobain and Noel Gallagher, and his obsession with music
as well.
Yeah, like For you, what was so great about how, for example, because I love myself some Nirvana, I love myself some Oasis. What was so great about how Kurt Cobain, crafted tunes, and how did that lead you to say, I want to transform myself into something like that?
Yeah, the Kurt Cobain story is so interesting because I like would have heard a couple of Nirvana songs growing up, but it was at a point where my third year with the Swans, when I was like totally over football, and my housemate pulled out his laptop and he had like this pirated version of a Kurt Cobain documentary, and I was like, yeah, sweet, we'll watch it, and I watched it, and then I was like, after that, I was like, far out, like I just want to do that, like that's what I want to do, because I'd always loved playing guitar. I'd played guitar since I was 10 years old, but for some reason, like seeing somebody, the way it's that kind of gravel in his voice, and it's not trying to hide anything, and it's so honest, and it confronts you. And I'm like that with a lot of the things I like artistically. Like when I go to a art gallery, I always stand in front of the thing that's just like, what the hell is that? Because it's confronting to look at, and it's confusing, but it makes me feel a certain way that, nothing else can. Kurt Cobain, I had a big period of obsession with him, and I still do. Like he's probably top 2 or 3 musicians all time for me. Just that fearlessness about him. And with their songs, Nirvana songs are pop songs. Like they have this idea of everyone, like they're this grungy band, but all their songs are like verse, chorus. Like they know what he was such a gifted songwriter like that. And that's why so many people love them. But it was just the grit of it that really spoke to me.
Yeah, I also think it's people often, I think, considering the trajectory that he took, say, oh, he was such a tormented artist, or the idea of tormented artists. And you talk about that, but a lot of things I think comes down to is, he's a great artist, but he was able to communicate that in such a fantastic way.
Well, I love people that kind of debunk stereotypes in a way. And the thing with Cobain is everyone views him as the quintessential tortured artist. Yeah. But you watch people talk about it and they're like, no, he was a relentless professional. Like before they recorded Nevermind, and he wasn't that slacker, and he cared about image, and he did care about everything. I love that when things are debunking of stereotypes.
Were a lot of your other mates that you surrounded you when you were at the Swans, or now, even looking at it now, did they follow that sort of similar path?
I'm just thinking about that chapter. That was probably one of my favorite chapters. The one that's an essay. I mean, the book has a few different forms, but that's an essay. That and the chapter where I kind of stream of conscious being on the field again and being a maniac. I for some reason really like that one. This idea of, because I personally always tried to divide sports and arts and view them as the opposites of each other, view them as binaries. But, having been in both fields and have really like researched both as well, at the end of the day, it's a common thing to want to create an order from disorder, and the order from chaos is a line in the book. And, on a footy field, you want to kick goals, but you have a game plan, or you make decisions, and you kick a ball a certain way. You could handball it, you could run with it, but you choose to kick it. And that's all directed towards this certain goal, which is to kick goals. And when I write or make music, like the end result is to create something. But I do that through if you're writing, you use accepted words or you use forms that people understand. So there's a lot of similarities there. As for teammates who are the same, I think that, that's the thing. They probably don't like to think that they're too similar to artists, and because that's how we grow up. We're thinking, artists are soft and we're footy players and we're hard. But it's funny. Most of my music mates love footy. Like they'll talk to me about footy more than anything. And there's a big overlap in the Sydney indie music scene and Sydney Swans lovers. It's hilarious. But yeah, the similarities there. Things that people don't think line up often do.
It's so fascinating examining that and looking at that and seeing that the drives are actually really similar. And the passion for it is really similar. So now we get to where you are now, and the stuff that you do. You make this fantastic. You talk about this great quote in the book that art is never finished, only abandoned, which is, I think, extremely extremely appropriate because
I think, yeah, part of me was just like, I think Leonardo da Vinci said that. And I think part of me was like, well, I just want to disagree with da Vinci, because why not? But yeah, no, yeah, continue. I just wanted to get that in.
It's a great quote, and it's also a great example of creative space because it's at the end of this book, and this is no spoilers for anyone here, but the feeling I got was that for you, this felt more like a beginning more than anything else. The end of this book. Where do you feel your calling now lies in the context of art? Obviously, there's the writing and there's the artist and there's the music, but where does Brandon Jack find himself in that space?
I think it's nice in a way that quote actually does mean a lot to me, because I was definitely of the opinion that, I struggle to finish things because I'm always aware of how far they could go or how they could be different. And I guess this was the first major body of work I'd done. And for me to finally kind of finish it and say, you know what, I might disagree with it in a year, or, there might be things I want to change, but to accept that was capturing a moment in time, that was such a big deal for me. And I'm glad that kind of since finishing, I've been able to do that with other projects as well. I'm not as much of a continually editing. I'm just like, no, I'm capturing this moment in time. And that's what art is to me. As for what it leads to, I would love to, I've been working on a novel for a while now. Love to write fiction next. I'd love to explore writing more non-fiction or, sharing other people's stories as well. So book writing is definitely one part of my future that I hope to keep doing. Music as well. I can't stop myself from making music. Like, I just love doing it, and we'll continue doing it even if it doesn't lead anywhere. But I just love doing it. And journalism is another thing that I dabble in but might keep exploring. So a lot of things to pursue.
Can you give us a hint? Can you give us some tiny pointers on what on that fiction book that you have coming?
Fiction book.
Or are we in spoiler territory now and we cannot go any further?
Well, I don't know. It's somebody asked me that the other day, and I'm like, I guess it's not what you'd expect me to do next after this, which is a nice thing. I like that, it's not what you'd expect next.
I think that's good. I think that's a good, because often so many people expect when you create a book and you write something and people expect you to stay within that lane. I feel like you shouldn't necessarily constrict yourself. If you want to write something, then go there. That's the place to be.
Yeah, for sure. And that's something that I'm firm with as well.
Yeah. I'm aware that we're running short on time now. So I just want to say thank you so much for coming on, Brandon. It's been an absolute privilege chatting to you and talking about this amazing book, and I really hope everyone enjoys it.
Thanks for having me on today.
So for all of our listeners, 28 is published by Allen & Unwin, and you can get your copy of it right now from booktopia.com.au. Thank you for listening to the Booktopia podcast channel. Don't forget, you can subscribe to us on SoundCloud and iTunes for free and get access to hundreds of author discussions, book analysis pieces, and more. Or, if your eyes need a workout, head to Booktopia TV on YouTube. Don't forget, for all books featured in this podcast and for access to a whole bunch of other fun content on our blog, head to Booktopia, Australia's local bookstore, at booktopia.com.au.